Enter Alyce LItz, Chapter 16. June passed into July. The weather grew muggy and brown. Every day I came home from my English class exhausted from the effort of listening so hard and focusing so intensely for so many hours. Usually, as soon as I got through the door, I threw myself on my bed and fell fast asleep for a few hours. One day I stopped to do some grocery shopping along the way, so I came home late. My leg was hurting that day and I felt unusually anxious, although I didn't know why. I lay down, closed my eyes, and began to dream without really falling asleep. I dreamed that I was trying to dial 911, but the phone didn't have those numbers. I had all the other numbers, but not those. I dreamed that I had to get through to emergency services because someone was at our door, knocking and banging, and my mother had collapsed and we were alone. The knocking finally grew so loud that I rose out of my dozing state and realized that this was no dream. Someone actually was knocking on our door. This never happened unless I had placed a call to our caseworker. No one ever came to see us unexpectedly because we did not know anyone. Well, I got out of bed, strapped on the remains of my old prosthetic leg, and opened the door. There stood Susan Sperry from World Relief. And beside her stood two other American women who were strangers to me. Blessed be the name of God, they stood there looking so blonde, so tall, and so merry. I invited them in and seated them on our only piece of furniture, a tattered couch. Since we had no chairs, I stood. My mother quickly brought out tea and fruit and hard candies for our guests. She had to boil the water in that one pot and served the tea in paper cups. But still, I think my mother and I both felt delighted to have visitors. The opportunity to welcome guests into our apartment made us feel more Afghan in a good way, made us feel like we had a home. Of course, I wondered what this was all about. Susan introduced the women. "This is Alyce," she said of the taller woman, "and this is Lorraine. These women work with World Relief as volunteers. They want to come once a week and help you with your English. How does that sound? Would you like that?" I watched her lips and listened as hard as I could. After almost 3 months in an ESL course, I knew enough English to get the gist of what she was saying. I got that these women wanted to tutor me, and I said yes enthusiastically, not just because I needed the help, but because if they tutored me, then they would come to our house once a week. We would have visitors. We would get to know somebody. The strangers then began asking me questions. They spoke very slowly and loudly because they knew that I had trouble with English. I listened hard and more or less understood what they were asking. I answered them, but what I said or how I said it, I didn't know. I can't believe I got anything across to them. Although when I asked Alyce about it later, she said, "You made sense. You answered all our questions. You spoke very well." I think she is exaggerating. She remembers me saying very clearly, "I love Mickey Mouse." I don't remember that. I do remember that they asked me questions like, "What is your name? Where did you come from? How many are in your family? Is it just the two of you? Do you have many difficulties? What did you need? How can we help?" Somehow I managed to say, yes, we have many problems. First of all, with transportation, getting groceries, getting to the doctor. These are the biggest things. Then they asked, "What do you need for your house? Do you need anything?" Well, since we did not have anything, the answer was yes. We needed everything. But I wondered what I should say we needed if I could mention only one thing. What did we need the most? I said a telephone. I thought that item might make the biggest difference to everything else we did. Then the one named Alyce opened her bag and took out some presents for us, some coloring books, a box of crayons, and a set of markers. She handed these to me. I was instantly reminded of Christina, the woman who had befriended me in Germany, for she too had brought me art supplies. I started coloring in the books right away because I was hungry for just this sort of occupation. You might suppose that a person who has escaped from suffering and oppression and the threat of death will be grateful and content simply to exist after that and want nothing more. But the human heart easily grows restless. It cannot stop yearning. Living in this little apartment with my mother, I had come to long for something more than the mere absence of pain. I'd come to crave some activity that would interest my mind. I wanted some fun. Those markers and coloring books were fun for me. I spent the whole afternoon drawing and coloring. Alyce joined in. After the visitors left us that day, I wanted them to knock on the door and start the visit all over again. Well, Lorraine got busy with her family life, so she did not come back the following week, but Alyce came, and she brought along a telephone. She installed it for us and got the service turned on. Now, for the first time since arriving in America, we felt connected to the world we lived in. Then Alyce asked what else we needed. I dared to tell her that we needed pots and pans, dishes, and cooking utensils. She brought us those items and asked, what else? I couldn't believe what was happening to us. Who was this angel? I decided to go ahead and tell her everything we needed, and she brought it all. We were still wearing our Afghan clothes up to this point because we had no others and no money to buy any. In our Afghan clothes, we stood out everywhere we went. People looked at us and immediately thought, those two are foreigners. They don't belong here. You can feel such thoughts on your skin. Alyce brought us clothes that matched the customs and styles of this country. We put them on, and the next time we went out, we could feel the sweet anonymity of blending in. American clothes made us feel so much safer in public. Then one day, Alyce's husband, John LItz, came over with a big television set for us. My mother says we used to have a television in Kabul, but I don't remember it. I was too little then. We saw television in Pakistan, of course, although not regularly. There, they show a lot of cricket, and we don't like cricket, because you have no idea what's going on in the game, where it begins or ends. We did like the occasional Indian movies we saw on Pakistani television, which are called Bollywood movies, because they are made in Bombay. They feature a lot of singing and dancing. And Quetta television also showed Pakistani movies made in Lahore, which are known as Lollywood films. They are much like Bollywood films. They have the same kind of singing and dancing, and we liked those too. But here in America, my mother feared television. She had heard that American television features scandalous programs filled with indecent sights unfit for the human eye. According to people in Pakistan, the images on American television are so indecent, a single momentary glimpse of them could corrupt a young girl like me. For this reason, my mother would not let me turn on our new television at first, lest I see something harmful to me before we could switch the channel or turn off the set. But after a hard day of studying English and struggling with the complications of living in America, I wanted to relax. I wanted to watch TV at night. Eventually, I convinced my mother to let me turn it on, but she always sat next to me to guard me against corruption. She would not let me watch television late at night, nor would she let me watch television by myself. She still maintains those rules, but we do watch television every night now. Alyce and John have gotten us a cable service called the Family Package. It provides only such shows as a young girl like me can watch safely. I have a few programs I watch regularly now, such as Fear Factor. On that show, people compete for prizes by doing unusual stunts. Yes, these include things like eating ants and snails. It does turn your stomach, sort of, but I enjoy it. My mother likes to watch cooking shows, quite a change from Fear Factor. She also likes a channel on which they sell clothes and other merchandise. She can follow those programs. She also lets me watch the news now. In fact, she insists on it. She herself watches the news avidly, even if I'm not by her side. She watches for stories about our part of the world. If I'm not in the room when a segment about Afghanistan or Pakistan comes on, she yells out, "Farah, it's Kabul, come quick. What are they saying?" We've been here for 3 years, but she doesn't speak much English. Yet, just a few scattered words. She needs me to translate everything. All of the new clothes, pots, pans, kitchenware, phone, television, and other goods changed our life, but not nearly as much as Alyce herself. She said she would come once a week, but she started coming much more often. In fact, before long, she was coming to see me every day. With most people, I have never been much of a talker. Conversation does not come easily to me. In a group, I often feel shy and keep my thoughts to myself. But Alyce brought the stories, questions, and confidences pouring out of me. As soon as she walked into our house, her eyes had such a sparkle, and her face wore such a flock of smiles that my heart opened wide. When she asked me, "Where do you come from?" I wanted to tell her the whole history of my life. Even that first time, after she left, I was tingling with excitement, and I said to myself, I can't be shy with this one. I have to open up and give her a chance to know who I am. She will be my friend to the end. Once we started spending time together, my English improved rapidly. We talked about every subject, so I learned the words I needed for all those different subjects. My vocabulary grew like weeds in a garden. Alyce let me ask questions of any kind and follow my curiosity wherever it led. She taught me how to become an American by telling me about the culture and customs here, what the holidays are, for example, and how you celebrate each one. She told me how to behave in a restaurant. I learned that your napkin should go on your lap. I didn't know that before. She taught me that when you go to a wedding, you don't bring something to the party. The bride goes to a local store beforehand and gives them a list of what she wants for her house. As a guest, you're supposed to go there and buy an item from the wish list. The store keeps track of what has been bought, and thus the bride and groom get just the wares they want with no duplicates. It is so well organized. Alyce told me about dating and how people don't consider it scandal over here when two people go out together. It's kind of normal. She said that if a young man and a young woman go out alone without their parents or an older relative along to keep watch, it's not that big of a deal. In fact, this is how people are supposed to meet in America, I discovered. I asked Alyce how she and her husband met and how he proposed, and she told me the whole story. They met in college, it turned out. One of Alyce's friends knew John, and this friend said to Alyce one day, "How about going out for a drink with me tonight? I know a couple of boys who will join us." John was one of those boys. That was how he and Alyce met. And then later they started going on dates alone, just the two of them. Eventually he asked her to have dinner in a restaurant with him, and she suspected he was planning to propose to her that night. But John is a shy man. That night he was quieter than usual because he was nervous about the question on his mind. He didn't say much, and they ate their meal. After the food was gone, they just sat there and talked about this and that little thing. But he did not ask the big question. Finally, 4 hours had passed. Alyce got exasperated. She said, "I'm tired and I want to go home. If you want to say something to me, say it now." And that's when he finally blurted out, "Will you marry me?" And that's how it happened. They were engaged for a year, and then finally they got married. Alyce invited us to her house for Thanksgiving that first year. We had never seen a turkey before and didn't know what it was. We never imagined a bird could grow so big. My mother didn't eat any of it. She knew it wasn't a pig because she saw that it had wings, but she suspected, correctly, that it had not been slaughtered in accordance with the ritual requirements of Islam. So it wasn't halal. She ate the potatoes and the vegetables, though, and she enjoyed those. In any case, I learned all about Thanksgiving from Alyce, and I learned the words that go with the holiday. When you're trying to master a new language, you learn quicker if you have a chance to speak without hesitation or fear. In class, I didn't have a chance to speak much. I had to spend much of my time listening to the teacher. When I was called upon to say something, it was a public situation and a performance. People were looking at me, and even as I tried to shape a thought, I worried what I might make a mistake and that the class might laugh at me. At the same time, I knew the teacher was waiting to correct me. It's easier to make progress in a language by talking with a friend and just trying to express the things you really want to say, best you can. My English improved more in a couple of weeks chatting with Alyce than it had in 3 months of taking that course. But I don't want to make it seem as if Alyce just helped me with English. As soon as she saw how much we needed, she took it upon herself to save our lives, and I do not use the word save lightly. She saw what difficulty we had just getting food, so she began bringing groceries over to our house, or she took me to the store to buy a whole bunch of groceries at once and get them back to our apartment in a car. When she saw that my mother needed medical care, she took it upon herself to set up her appointments and get her to the doctors on time. Alyce set us free from those seedy, chain-smoking, hard-drinking taxi drivers. She also went to our appointments with us. She asked the doctors the questions we didn't know how to ask. In fact, she asked the questions we didn't even know we should ask. Alyce got us better medical care because without her, the doctors could not get much information from us. They had to rely purely on what they could learn from their instruments. In those days, my mother was still having frequent asthma attacks. I had to rush her to the hospital at all odd hours. Alyce never failed us in those moments. I could call her at midnight, at 2:00 a.m., or at any time of night, and she would come. I was still walking around on the prosthesis I got in Germany. It was over 5 years old now, and really starting to fall apart. But I didn't know how to get a new one. Zainab had set up that appointment with the prosthetics lab for me when I was still her client. The one I missed because of the taxi driver, she went ahead and arranged another appointment for me and sent a taxi again, just out of the goodness of her heart. I made it to the second appointment on time, only to be told that public aid would not pay for a new prosthetic leg for me, so that came to nothing. Alyce saw me hobbling about on that outsized wooden foot from the Pakistani shop, and she decided to take action. She found both a place that would make me a good prosthetic and a way to pay for it, and she took me there. By the end of the first year, I had a new prosthetic leg with a foot proportional to my size. In short, I saw that Alyce was working just as hard on our behalf as we ourselves. That's when I said to myself, at last, I have someone. I don't know what would have happened to us if Alyce had not found us. Before I met Alyce and John, my mother and I were living in a prison constructed of our ignorance. Alyce opened the bars of that prison by showing us the world we now lived in. One time they took us to Holland, Michigan, for an event called the Tulip Festival. We strolled through the most beautiful set of gardens I have ever seen. It reminded me of a scene in a famous Bollywood movie in which a girl sings a song in a tulip field. At that Holland Tulip Festival, I felt like that girl. Another time, Alyce and John took me into the city of Chicago to a place called the Field Museum. There I saw things that opened my eyes, wonderful things. The whole experience took me back to the way I had felt in second grade, listening to our beloved teacher, Malim Sahib, talking about the stars. I felt like I was finally picking up on that thread the landmine broke. The museum was saying to me, here is the world again, and look how big it is and how much it contains. I saw stuffed animals there from all parts of the world. I learned what sorts of creatures live in the jungles and deserts and on the slopes of high mountains and in the deepest oceans, all without having to go to those different environments. The Field Museum had mummies too. I'd never heard of mummies before. I never dreamed that such a thing as a mummy could exist in our world. Yet here they were, along with pictures from Egypt, the country where they came from. The museum had pictures of the pyramids and temples and monuments and the people of Egypt built in ancient times. You could get an idea of what life was like back then and what people believed and why and how they turned their kings and other famous dead people into mummies. In second grade, I marveled to learn merely that other countries existed, countries where people rode trains and went about bareheaded and spoke languages unlike mine. Now I discovered that the world was even more inconceivably various than I had imagined back then. At this museum, they had room-sized boxes showing scenes of everyday life as it existed in this very area, less than 200 years ago. They showed how the native people lived at that time, in houses made of animal skins, wearing clothing made of fur, using tools made of reeds and bones. The scenes showed how they hunted animals with bows and arrows and traveled from place to place on rivers in handmade canoes of tree bark. They showed everything. These box scenes were like moments of real life, frozen in time, complete with realistic figures of the people themselves, wearing the actual clothes of their culture and handling the actual goods and tools they made. The canoes, the bows, the hatchet, it was so interesting to look into those boxes and realize that people followed this way of life not so very long ago, right where this museum now stood. And these were Americans. In fact, these were the real and original Americans. And yet they were so undeveloped, even compared to Afghans. They did not know about science and machinery and modern technology until the British came. It made me ponder why some ways of life succeed and spread while others succumb to time and vanish. It made me think about the differences that exist today between America and Afghanistan, and why my homeland is mired in such difficulties, and why I can't seem to shake its way out of its problems. I also saw dinosaurs at this museum. I had never heard of dinosaurs before I came to America. Now I saw the skeletons of these monsters and models of what they looked like. I saw a film about the people who find dinosaur bones. They work so carefully, it amazes you. When they find something in the ground, they might be a bone, they rub it with a delicate brush so it won't shatter or break. This work really caught my interest. A few days after that visit to the museum, I saw a show about dinosaurs on television. I watched it with Alyce. That night when I went to sleep, I saw a dinosaur in my dreams. It was running through the jungle, and I was in that jungle too. In fact, the dinosaur was chasing me. I was running as hard as I could, and I turned my head to see if it was gaining. And at that very moment, it took off in one tremendous bounding leap that lifted it into the air and brought it arcing toward me. The sun vanished in its shadows, and its shadows grew around me as it descended down and down until the impact of its body on mine woke me up. Yes, I woke up with a jolt because my teddy bear had fallen off a shelf onto my neck. But in the grogginess of that moment, I still thought it was the dinosaur, and I tangled with it. We wrestled. I managed to fling it away in total horror, hard enough that it hit the wall with a thud. The next morning, I picked up the poor teddy bear and apologized. So dinosaurs got mixed into my nightmares, but outside of the nightmares, I found them fascinating creatures. Why were they so different from the animals we see today? Their size, their shape, and how interesting that we don't see such creatures anymore. They populated Earth in huge numbers at one time, and nothing could stand up to them. And now they are all gone. That is so strange. It makes you think about the world and what lasts and what doesn't. Another time, Alyce and John took me sailing on Lake Michigan. John's brother has a sailboat, so we went for a ride one summer afternoon. They gave me some medicine before we started, which was supposed to stop a person from getting sick. I never really felt sick, and I rode that boat without any fear, even though we sailed until we could no longer see land in any direction. The wind drove the boat along, so we never went very fast. But the boat moved up and down and back and forth in a sort of constant rolling motion that made me dizzy, especially if I stood at the rails and looked out. They tried to distract me from the motion by giving me food. They gave me lots and lots of food, but it didn't help. I found the whole experience pretty interesting at the time, but later I realized it exhausted me, because as soon as we got home, I fell asleep, and I more or less slept for 2 days. I didn't throw up, so I guess the tablet worked, but I never went sailing again. 2 days of recovery from 1 day of sailing doesn't seem like a worthwhile trade. I'm very fond of Alyce's husband, John. He's such a gentleman, so smart and hardworking. He and I have spent a lot of time together. He took me to summer school every day one summer, and we have talked about many things while driving. John is a businessman. He shares his business experience with me, which I like, because maybe I will run a business one day myself. Whenever he goes on a business trip, he tells me all about it when he comes back, and I like to hear his stories. John took me to a golf course a few times. He loves golf, and he wanted to teach me how to play the game. I didn't know what I was doing, but he said, "You're doing good. Now you're getting it. Excellent, excellent." In fact, I did manage to hit the ball, and it went way up high. He took me to play ping pong one time too, and it was fun, but mostly because of John. Alyce and John have a daughter, and she's nice too. I don't know her very well because she's grown up and lives on her own. But I can tell that she's nice because she's never jealous of all the attention Alyce gives me. If my mom were to give this much attention to someone else, I would go crazy. So I admire Alyce's daughter for sharing her mother with me like this. I'm a strong person. I have drive and I want to study. But without Alyce and John, I might have grown up given up because I had no supporters, no encouragement. Alyce and John LItz restored my zest for life by giving me love, by pampering me, by giving me their attention. They give me a kind of attention I didn't get from my own family, not even when we were all alive and together. To be honest, I'm a little spoiled now. These people praise me when I do well at something, but they give me positive attention even when I don't do so well. I draw a picture and I can see that it isn't great. I have eyes, but they still say what a lovely artist you are, what a talent you have. They tell me I'm pretty. They tell me I'm cute. They call me honey and sweetie. They give me energy and life and hope. I love them so much. One day, if God wills it, I will be strong, successful adult, and I will be there for them when they are old and need love, care, and attention. May Allah will that I have a chance to give them as much as they have given me. When I was little, I was part of a big family in which everyone cared about everyone, but no one paid that much attention to me in particular. Frankly, it isn't the custom in Afghanistan for adults to give a lot of individual attention to any one child. On top of that, I was one of 5 children in my family, and on top of that, there were many other children around too, the children of my aunts and uncles. And then I was so young when I stepped on that landmine and got snatched out of my family and world. And then I lost my family and had to go to Pakistan. So I never got much love or attention growing up. I had a sad and serious childhood. In fact, I barely had a childhood at all. I was forced to grow up very suddenly. Alyce and John are letting me live a little of my childhood now, even though I am past the time for it. They let me behave in very childish ways sometimes. I make demands and act silly. Better late than never. When I'm with these two, I don't even think of myself as a young woman. I don't think about the fact that I am grown up and should act my age. Instead, I say, take me out, I want ice cream. But then I think about how much they have done for me. God love them, and I think I should hold back. As they say in Afghanistan, when someone extends their hand, don't climb on their shoulders. But I couldn't help it. When Alyce met me, I was like a drowning girl. She reached out her hand, and I started climbing up her arm. I know I should watch myself and hold back, and yet I act like a child with them. On the other hand, in many ways, I am older than most kids my age. I have a serious side, too serious probably. It's as if there are pools of darkness in me. One thing I love about Alyce is that she can accept me in my dark moods. Some days, the pressure comes upon me and the world grows stormy. My past arises inside me and I remember things that make me angry. Or I grow lonely or sullen or sad, or I brim with unbearable feelings that I cannot name or express. Alyce accepts anything that comes out of me in these moods. She doesn't turn against me when I snap or rage at her, and I do, believe me. Sometimes it gets pretty rough. She just listens quietly and lets me rant till I am spent and can rage no more. Then she gives me a hug and says, "Oh, I am so sorry." How could I not love a person like that? Even though we grew up so differently, we have things in common. Her mother, too, had emotional problems. Alyce was the youngest of 3 siblings, and she grew up feeling unnoticed. She had a lonely childhood, and so she understands about loneliness. She says, "That's why I gave my own daughter so much attention. That's why I give you so much attention. Believe me, I understand about loneliness." One day, Alyce told me a story. She said that just before September 11th, she was reading a book called The Little Princess. It told about the way women lived in countries like Saudi Arabia. Then she read another book called Stolen Lives, which also told about the situation of women in places like Afghanistan under the Taliban. These books stirred her heart, and she wanted to connect with someone from that part of the world, so she began exploring how to start a correspondence with a Muslim woman. She wanted to find a pen pal, but then 9/11 happened, and suddenly it was much harder for an American woman to make a connection with a Muslim woman, much harder for any 2 people in these 2 worlds to get to know each other. Alyce told me she prayed that God would somehow give her a pen pal. Now, she said she believed that God had answered her prayers more fully than she had imagined possible. Instead of a pen pal, she had gotten a real live human being, someone she could get to know in real life. She got me. Then I told her about my experience in Quetta, when I relinquished myself to Allah and felt that He had taken notice of me and had a plan for me. Alyce is such an important part of my story. I don't know if God sent us to each other, but I know God gave her that big heart, which she shares with me. Of course, she has helped a lot of people in need. She works with a nonprofit organization called Love Christian Clearinghouse. She is the president of the board of directors of this group, which partners with 94 churches in the area. She has organized volunteers to help many refugees and other poor and needy families and people, and she has given her own time to many people before me. But with me, I think there is something more. Alyce and I have a special connection, and she says so too. I think this connection comes from God. When we came to America, my mother was thinking, what if my daughter loses her religion and becomes a Christian here? When I discarded my headscarf, she panicked. In those early days when I went out with Alyce, she stayed awake watching for me. She worried that this woman would take me to church and force me to convert, or that she would take me to unsuitable movies, to dances and parties, that she would corrupt me. But Alyce was simply nourishing my spirit. She was the one person who took an interest in any progress I made, the one person to whom I could recount my day's adventures. Everyone needs an audience of at least one. John and Alyce never say, oh, you should eat pork, or a little wine won't harm you, or don't listen to your mom. In fact, when we go to a restaurant, Alyce reads the menu carefully to make sure there's no pork or alcohol in any of the dishes. They never say your religion is no good, our religion is better. You should come over to our religion. When my mother and I go to her house, Alyce lets my mother know when it is prayer time, which room she can pray in, and even which way she should turn to face Mecca. Alyce is so thoughtful that way, and she cooks with halal meat for us so that my mother will be able to eat. Alyce does ask about my religion, and she listens to what I say and tries to understand. I am no scholar, but I tell her what I know about Islam. I tell her we believe that God, dear, is unique and one of a kind, a light that one sees with one's heart, not with one's eyes. I tell her with respect and love, Jesus too. He is one of our prophets. We know his stature and believe he will return to herald the day of judgment. She listens without interrupting. Then she tells me what she believes, and I listen. I see nothing wrong with listening to each other's beliefs. I want to know about her religion just as she wants to know about mine. We can talk about our beliefs without pushing each other to feel wrong. This is one reason why I love her so much. But there are many other reasons that I love her too. She's funny. She makes me laugh. When I'm with her, I forget my problems. I don't think of her as an American or a foreigner or this or that nationality. It never crosses my mind that she's an adult woman so much older than me. Different ages, different religions, different nationalities, none of that matters. She's my friend. It's as simple as that. She calls me at least once a day, and we talk about everything. With her, whatever comes into my heart comes out of my mouth. We hide nothing from each other.